Inside this room, all of my dreams become realities, and some of my realities become dreams.
What in the wide, wide world of sports is going on here? Alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You are listening to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute. Here are your hosts, Alan Sanders and Walt Murray.
Welcome back, everyone, to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute. I'm Alan Sanders, and we are diving into Season 2 of Blazing Saddles, one church full of Johnsons minute at a time. And my co-host is...
Walt Murray.
How'd you like that intro, Walt? Totally different.
Yeah, you screwed it up, right?
Wait! No! I was trying something different.
No, that's always good.
You know, everything starts sounding formulaic.
Well, it's an intro.
It is. Well,
yes,
it's supposed to be.
Excellent intro.
Nothing like a church full of Johnsons anyway.
Yeah.
So we have with us today on this hump day, we're at the middle of the week, we are joined by a brand new guest with us here, and it's our pleasure to introduce Thomas Howarth joining us here on The Wilder Ride. Thomas, welcome.
Howdy, partners.
Oh, look at that. He's already donning the Old West accent.
I got to get into the movie, you know.
Thomas, why don't you let everybody know a little bit about your background with podcasting and movies by minutes?
Sure. So I started listening to, like most, to Star Wars Minute, and that made me want to do my own thing. So I reached back to my childhood and started tackling the Never-Ending Story 1 minute at a time. On the Never-Ending Minute, had a great co-host in Tierney Steele, and that's completed, but it was a super fun project, and we even got to talk to the childlike empress herself in it. It was pretty awesome. That's
fantastic. I've got it in my queue to get caught up on. There are just too many movies by minutes to keep track of them all.
You're telling me.
That movie I grew up on as well. I was a little bit on the older edge of it, but as I told you before we even started recording, I had two younger brothers that came along. Sort of, the one was unplanned, and my mom and dad felt like, well, there's such a big gap. Let's go ahead and have another, so they'll kind of have buddies together when they're growing up, so they can be close in age.
That's sweet.
And so I got a chance to go ahead and have the excuse of being the big brother who was, well, I have to watch my younger brother, so we're going to watch The Never-Ending Story, and secretly still love that movie.
Of course.
Great flick.
Yep. Definitely a favorite of mine, even though when you listen to the show, you'll see that it terrified me at some points, but it was still my favorite.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned Tierney, because she will be joining us later in this season for minutes 58 and 59. She wanted to have Lily von Stupp in her minutes for some reason.
I wonder why.
All right, well, let's go ahead and set the table for where we are. This is minute number 18, and if you remember when we last left off, we were still in the church with everybody from town gathering and having this discussion about what's going on in Rock Ridge, and we're going to end with the words now, and we're going to begin with the words now and end with, let us pray for the deliverance of our new sheriff. So, Walt, I'll kick it off to you first, because we had this great monologue being delivered by Olson Johnson, and it cut off just at the very last adjective, now.
Yeah, well, and that was one of the best monologues that we've heard in quite a while, and I'm really kind of getting used to these great comedic monologues in these Mel Brooks films.
When Thomas, when you went to go see this movie for the very first time, and you said, your older brother kind of introduced you to it, what was your thought? First, before we even get into this minute, but just kind of as a young person watching a zany Mel Brooks movie, what were some of the things you walked away with in terms of comedy, but also message?
It was actually when I was a little bit older, probably in my teens, that he finally introduced this to me. So I was already kind of on board with the zany stuff, because he started me off watching Saturday Night Live and Young Frankenstein and things like that. So I was already kind of attuned to the Mel Brooks kind of way. This is just digging farther back to where he held back a little less than he did in the more current movies like Spaceballs. So seeing this was like, it was like hearing the same language, but an earlier version of it. So I was right on board with it, and it all it all like hit my funny bone just the way it was supposed to.
Now, obviously, this movie is full of what we would consider today non-correct humor, non-politically correct. But when you look at it, I mean, I don't think it would have been considered appropriate if it was supposed to be taken seriously in its day. But being a satire, trying to paint a picture of society that says, look how stupid racism is, what did you think about in terms of the message after you kind of watched it a few times?
Oh, I love the way that Mel Brooks leans into these things so harshly. Like when, he's saying the N-word over and over and digging into it, or actually, I guess we could talk about the next minute a little bit when he's talking about the little red devils, but it's coming from this obvious idiot who can't even keep his eyes, uncrossed. It gives that, it like lets you know, hey, we understand this stuff is wrong, and that's why we're leaning into it now. We can laugh about it, but if you're doing this stuff seriously, you're wrong. And I love that Mel Brooks wasn't scared to put that message forth.
Well, I'm going to ask this to you first, but then, Thomas, you can dive in on it as well. At what point did you realize everyone in this town was last name Johnson?
I think in the church scene, when they were going through and they kept standing up and it was Olson Johnson is right. Samuel Johnson is right. Howard Johnson is right. I was like, holy crap, everybody's named Johnson. What's the deal here?
Yeah, it's like that internet meme that's been out. Like, how old were you when you figured out that this did this? I was this many years old. Like, I was now years old. Listening to it now, it's like they're all Johnson.
Really? So you just, as you were doing these minutes for prep, you just realized, oh my God. When, of course, we all know what Johnson is a nickname for. So apparently, even though Richard Dix came to town, there were already a bunch of dicks here already.
So it's kind of funny because my brother, who, of course, introduced this to me, was also big into wearing the Big Johnson shirts back in the 90s.
Oh, yeah.
And hearing this, that's about all I can think about is a church full of Johnsons. And there's some T-shirt waiting to be made about Big Johnsons in a church.
That's fantastic. Well, we go through here now. Let's go and start parsing out some of this dialogue, because just as Olson Johnson finishes, we get another Johnson standing up after all the clapping. And by the way, is Gabby yelling Reverend as though that's sort of a harumph?
Yes. Instead of amen, he's saying Reverend.
Reverend.
And he says it to everybody.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And there's also this great pregnant pause, like right after he finishes the now. Everybody just stops. And then he gets up and says, he's right. Like he had to process what it was he said.
Yeah, Dr. Samuel Johnson. And he makes a point of, and this joke does play out, Walt, like you were saying, Olson Johnson is right. What kind of people are we anyhow? I say we stay and fight it out.
So do you think it was his choice to go with eyebrows like that, or did somebody say we got to do something here?
I don't know. For the very first time I saw this movie, I thought, what was Grandpa Joe doing in here from Willy Wonka?
Right, exactly. Yes,
he does look like him
in this minute.
I mean, just for that moment, you're like, wait, is that? Oh no, it's not. But for a second, I was expecting to see the next scene with him all like in bed with Grandpa Georgina and Grandpa George and whatever, sharing the 4-poster bed. But he's definitely the town doctor. And he makes a point of saying, yes, Olson Johnson is right.
I want to know what kind of work it takes to get one eyebrow to go literally up like that when the other one goes down. Is that prosthetic?
Technically, that would be old age. Eyebrows start doing wanky things when you get older.
Maybe he's having a stroke while they're filming. Just roll with it.
It's a Mel Brooks sort of inside joke. It's a little silent Hail Hitler.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that would make sense.
From the producers.
Yeah, that would make
It's springtime.
Sense.
It's funny you say Hail Hitler just as my screen shot to Gabby sticking his hand straight up in the air.
Reverend.
Well, Gabby does not let us forget that it's a comedy.
No. Well, and the thing is, we got this next guy that gets up, Higgins from Magnum PI.
Thank you for saying it, because it was in my notes.
He gets up and he makes a point of saying, Dr. Samuel Johnson's right about Olson Johnson being right. And I'm not giving up my ice cream parlor that I built with these two hands for nothing or nobody.
Now, is it me or is it a real big missed joke here that he didn't own a hotel?
Well, we kind of talked about that a little bit yesterday, the history of the Howard Johnson line, and it actually did start only with ice cream.
Oh, yeah. I did not know that.
Yeah, and they were known for ice cream before they got into anything else.
Okay.
Before Baskin Robbins, the big thing was, oh, you can get different varieties of ice cream at the Howard Johnson.
Nice. So I guess that joke does play out perfectly then. I'll retract my statement.
Well,
No. I mean,
it's
part of it is
interesting that you say it because I don't think that anybody our age, I mean, I'm a little bit older than you, but I don't think that people our age would have known that that's what they were known for because we grew up seeing the hotels.
Right.
And the restaurants.
And in fact, Thomas, from my perspective, I always thought it was a playoff of the Baskin Robbins. I never realized Howard Johnson sold ice cream. I just thought it was funny because when we see the street earlier and it says Howard Johnson's one flavor, I was like, oh, okay, right. That's all you get is one, as opposed to Baskin Robbins, whatever, 56 or however many flavors they had at the time.
32, baby.
32 flavors. So when Walt, and that's what we love about doing these, because you then dive into that, not just the minutia, but you're like, you look up things just for the fun of it. Next thing you know, Walt's like, all right, let me give you the lineage and the history of the Howard Johnson empire.
You're telling me I started going down a Magnum PI like black hole. I started looking at stuff.
Well, I loved the original Magnum PI. I know they're rebooting it now, and the wife and I are watching it. It's kind of okay, but they shouldn't call it Magnum PI because it's beyond the fact that he drives a Ferrari and it's in Hawaii. It's just kind of a PI detective show.
Now, maybe you guys can answer this question for me being just a little bit older. Was Magnum PI a spinoff of Knight Rider?
No,
it was a standalone show.
I saw as I was going through IMDb that it had something about a trailer for Magnum PI, and the first person you see on it is David Hasselhoff. And I was like, is that part of it? But it wouldn't play on my phone, so I didn't get a chance.
No, and in fact, I believe it was two different networks. I thought it was CBS initially for Magnum PI, and it was NBC for Knight Rider.
Probably.
And I would think that Magnum PI would have been...
Magnum PI was first.
A few years before,
In fact, Thomas, if you want to really mess your mind up, I had no idea that the original pilot for the very first episode of Magnum PI had a completely different theme song. It wasn't the typical one that we hear. And I heard it. I was like, how did this ever get picked up for an actual show? The opening original is so bad.
And the one that we know was so amazing.
Oh, it's so good that they use it still for the reboot or the reimagining or whatever they want to call it today. So yeah, Higgins gets up here, and I guess we need to call him the proper name. He's Howard Johnson, and he also wants to stick around because he built his ice cream parlor with his own two hands.
Dr. Samuel Johnson's right about Olson Johnson's being right. And I'm not giving up my ice cream parlor that I built with these two hands for nothing or nobody.
My own two hands, and gosh darn it, no one's going to take it from me.
Hey, Walt, is there any more useless person in this town than Van Johnson?
Well, he's just kind of the, I don't know, like the encourager or the affirmer of everybody else. He doesn't really ever disagree with anybody. He just he's kind of there pushing everybody along.
Well, it's almost like he wants to be part of the conversation but has nothing to add, so he either repeats what the last person says or gives a thumbs up to what the last person said.
Well, he's also the guy later on that goes in to get the sheriff, right?
Right, and screws that up because he thinks he's at the window and completely misses that he's at the desk.
Yeah, so he's kind of like the town numbnuts.
He is.
He doesn't have an original thought, but he's more than happy to yes man somebody else.
This is the kind of the role of the village idiot.
Yeah, he's definitely.
I thought that was Gabby.
Well, Gabby's different. I think Gabby he's the Yosemite Sam of this town. He may speak with all that frontier gibberish, but I get the feeling that he's used to roughing it on the land, drinking all day, and doesn't ever get taken advantage of. Whereas this Van Johnson, I just think he's trying too hard to be part of the conversation. And I think we all know people like that. You know, they just repeat what the last person said because they want to be in the conversation too.
And now I know why you have me on the show.
That's why we bring guests.
I thought that was why I was here.
Well, right after Howard Johnson says the thing and Van Johnson pops up and says, Howard Johnson is right. Reverend Johnson says, well, if we're going to stay, and I think it's a big mistake, we're going to have us a sheriff. Now, who's it going to be?
Now,
at this point, I want to get to the script because there is about an entire page that was not put in the movie that was actually written for this particular scene. Because immediately following, Reverend Johnson is supposed to then add, all right, nominations for the office of sheriff or for Sheriff Johnson are now in order. Van Johnson says, I say we nominate Olson. Olson steps up. Gentlemen, I am honored, but I must decline on the grounds of I won't do it. I nominate Van Johnson. Van Johnson, I am not unaware of the prestige and the honor of the office of sheriff. I am also not unaware of the death that frequently accompanies the job. I am therefore forced by good sense and fear to decline. Reverend Johnson then says, this town can't survive without a sheriff to keep the peace. Now, who's it gonna be? There's a pause. Everyone shuffles in their seats. A little boy, Henry, breaks away from his mother, jumps into the aisle, and makes a speech. I want to be the sheriff. I can do it. I can do it. Please, make me the sheriff. Make me the sheriff. There's shouts of citizens seriously considering it when suddenly Howard Johnson steps up and says, why don't we wire the governor to send us a sheriff?
Why don't we wire the governor to send us a sheriff? Why should we get our own men killed?
Howard Johnson is right. We'll wire the governor.
Right. Then let us pray for the deliverance of our new sheriff.
So all of that stuff I just read, not in the movie.
Sad. Although, Mel Brooks makes some great choices on what to cut and what not to. And as I said, I was just refreshing myself listening to some of the stuff that you guys had talked about at the end of Young Frankenstein. And he seems to be a master of, this may have gotten written down once and somebody thought it was funny, but yeah, maybe we don't need this in the movie.
Yeah, I'd kind of have to agree with you. I'm really glad they either cut or didn't film that segment, particularly the one with the kid. That's kind of stupid.
It is. Although it is funny, the stage direction here, or the direction for what the background is doing. Shots of all the citizens seriously considering it. yeah, let the kid do it. Yeah, sure. I wonder if Henry's the same one that shot the Waco kid.
Oh yeah, it could be.
I wonder if that was supposed to be the little Easter egg tie-in that we would get later when we meet the Waco kid.
I do love how when the Reverend here admits that it's a mistake, to say here, he's kind of praying to God as he says it.
Yeah.
He takes this deep look up to the sky. Is like, it's a mistake. You know it. I know it. Please don't burn us for it.
Yeah.
And by the way, that is an ad lib. That is not in the script either. When he actually goes up to the heavens and says, and I think it's a big mistake. Because his line is actually, well, let us pray for the deliverance of our new sheriff. The congregation will now rise. So there is nothing about him saying that it's a mistake, or I think it's a mistake. So there's a lot we discover that were ad-libbed, and I think Mel Brooks works that way, where these actors are given a chance to kind of just play around a little bit. And in some ways, I think that always makes for a stronger final product.
There's one thing I couldn't help but notice in the scene is the lady at the organ who has to turn like completely around backwards, looking at everybody the whole time through the whole scene. And she just has to quietly sit there turned around like that.
Speaking of, she does a good job keeping the continuity. But Reverend Johnson has a bit of a problem because at one point when he says, this town's going to need a sheriff, who's it going to be? He leans on the pulpit. If you look at it leans on the lectern there, and he's got his arms down, or one arm kind of like down. And then when it cuts to the wide shot, he's standing straight up with his hands both sides of the lectern.
Yep.
So that happens right around, for our guests playing along at home, right around second 39 to 40 is when he leans down, and then in 41 when they pull back, and we see the bit of a continuity error. So I got to give it to the organist. I haven't seen her like not be where she's supposed to be from edit to edit.
Yeah, and well, in one of the cuts, I was having a hard time telling if it was a real person or if it was a mannequin, but it's definitely a real person.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. If you're looking at like shortly after that cut that you were talking about, she wobbles her head some.
Yeah, and the way it's shot, she's almost always out of focus for the depth of field. But she is moving. She does move, and she's always paying attention.
She does nod, and she does clap once.
So,
but she's pretty stoic.
All right, now I asked this question yesterday, and actually the day before, because we couldn't figure it out. So, Thomas, I'm going to ask you, do you have any sense who's actually in charge in this town?
I was just about to ask you guys that. With the way that Howard Johnson's speaking up, he seems like he's taking charge, but then the guy who gave the whole speech before that, Olson, yeah, I don't know. I guess if I were to say anything definitively, it's that they lead by community.
Yeah, it almost feels like it's more Olson Johnson and Howard Johnson seem to be the two most vocal. But then throughout the course of the movie, you do see Samuel Johnson seems to have some things to say. Van Johnson has absolutely nothing to say.
I want to know how big this church is, I just realized, because in the very beginning when Dr. Johnson steps up, he turns around to the back when it seems like most of the people are behind him, but he's talking to the back of the church.
Well, the cool thing yesterday, we had a cowboy historian with us, a longtime lover of all things West. He's also a gun trick artist. He's been in the History Channel's the Way of the Gun or the History of the Gun. Just a great guy. And I asked him, I said, is this a true kind of prairie church? Is this about the right size? And he said, absolutely. This is actually pretty correct for what you would have expected about this time for this kind of a small church in a community.
Awesome.
So they got this right.
I think I went to a church like this. What are you talking about?
Look, I live in the South, so as long as there's no snakes, I feel like I'm okay.
Yeah, I grew up in Bakersfield, California, and I'm pretty sure the Baptist church I went to for a while was very similar to this, including the little hymns written on the board on the side of the wall there.
Mm-hmm. Yep. But you know what? I grew up with that too. I actually grew up Catholic up in Detroit and then moved down here and kind of played around with some other denominations. But I've always liked sort of the more traditional feeling churches for some reason. I'm not into the churches that look like a gymnasium and we're all going to like play a lot of music and jump around and make it like a concert. I know that's the in thing, but I guess it's just I was raised, I kind of like more of this with the pews and more of the formality.
Yeah, it's not a church unless your butt hurts at the end of it. I mean,
right. How do I know when I want to get out of there?
Exactly right.
How do I know?
Don't make it too much fun.
God, if I don't feel it in my butt.
What's this idea? Making it fun and will make me want to stay. I got home. I want to get home and go out and play.
Well, the worst part is our church is meeting in kind of a temporary space, and we've got very comfortable, soft chairs. And I sit down, and Amy starts having to hit me in the ribs, trying to wake me up. So,
oh, really?
Yeah. So
you really are Homer Simpson.
The pews definitely have a real advantage that way.
And you know that after they were done with this meeting, they went to a potluck.
Oh, no question. No question.
Yeah. Everybody brought a dish.
14 dishes of potato salad.
All right. Now, this is something I don't know in terms of history, but I know a lot of the more Baptist churches are certainly not Catholic because we never did stuff. We were at church all day. But would this time frame, would that be something that you would do all Sunday long? You go to service and then you hang out after and everybody kind of sticks around and then you go to service again?
I don't know. I always, maybe it's personal experience skewing my thought, but I always thought there was a little bit of down home or like downtime where you went home, but you did go back for an evening service.
So here is here's an odd piece of history that I know. When towns started getting electricity in the South, usually the first building to get electricity was the church, because the church was used for meetings like this, for church services, for any emergency type situations. So they would go ahead and wire the church up. Well, it was such a novelty item that on Sunday evenings, they'd flip the lights on and everybody would want to come just to kind of see the electricity and to be able to do something at night. So that's when a lot of churches started having both, at least Protestant churches, started having, in addition to the morning service, which was at 11, of course, so they didn't really need the electricity, started having an evening service to bring in those people who wanted to come for that for the lighting.
See, I thought I had heard something like that somewhere, that this was like the day you just set aside Sunday, not only because it said so biblically, but that it was something about it's a day of church or a day of being with your church congregation. And even if you did go home, you came back for the evening service.
Yeah, and that's true, but I think that it grew, particularly in stuff like the Baptist churches that were a little less traditional. That was one of their big draws.
All right. Anything else before we, because I normally like to go around the room. Is there anything in general anybody has for this minute?
Not necessarily, no.
Well, except that we continue the onslaught of new actors.
Yeah, I was going to say, Walt, we had so many we introduced. We might as well go ahead and dive into some of their history.
Yes, let me do the quick run through on these. Samuel Johnson, Dr. Samuel Johnson, was played by Richard Collier. Richard Collier was born in one of my favorite cities, Boston, Massachusetts, in 1919, and he died in Caballos. I knew I was going to kill this one. Caballos, California, some town in California. His first acting job that he's credited with, of his 118 credits, is a movie called The Glass Wall from 1953. And he is credited as the giggling man in the arcade. I was not able to find any other information on that, but that sounds like one heck of a credit.
Wow.
But after that, he was on Alfred Hitchcock Presents. He was on Snow White and the Three Stooges in 1961, where he played a guy named Turnkey. He was on the TV show Bonanza, which of course was a great Western show. Rawhide in 1962. In 1967, he was in Batman. He was in the Batman television show, and he played a guy named Mr. Puffendorfer. I don't remember that character, but that sounds like an interesting name. He was on the Beverly Hillbillies. He was on.
Wait a minute, you can't remember Mr. Puffendorfer?
I know that's hard to believe.
First name Otto.
Autoerotic Puffendorfer. Yeah, I don't know where they were going with that, but it was the 60s. It was a crazy time. He was on the Beverly Hillbillies. He was on Chips in 1978.
God, I love that show.
Oh, awesome show. Awesome show. Now, here's an interesting part for him that I never would have put him in. He was in the 1983 Stephen King movie Christine, and he played a character named Pepper Boyd. And once I saw Pepper Boyd's picture, I was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. But it really doesn't seem like his kind of movie. But, I guess when you're a working actor, you work. And
I'm going to have to go back and rewatch that, because I really enjoy the John Carpenter sort of take on Christine.
Yeah, I do too. It's a good movie.
Definitely. I watched it maybe 2 years ago, and yeah, I was just flipping through and saw it and ended up watching it all the way through.
Yeah, that is one of those movies that whenever it comes on, I end up sitting and watching it. And it was really well made. Even, for 1983, I mean, some great stunts, and it was a good movie.
Oh, yeah, all practical effects, which was really cool.
Effects, yeah, the car rebuilding itself was incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, his final work was a movie called Eve of Destruction in 1991, and then he died shortly after that. We've already talked a little bit about John Hillerman, who's playing Howard Johnson. Higgins, exactly. And he's got 72 credits, which was a surprise for me. And here's the other oddity about him. He started acting in 1970, His first credit was They Call Me Mr. Tibbs. Then he was in The Last Picture Show, played a teacher. He was in one of the shows that we watched a lot at my house as a kid, The FBI. He played a guy named Morris Ridley in a 1972 episode. He was in High Plains Drifter. Alan, you'll appreciate this. He was in Paper Moon.
Yeah, I was going to say, we can't leave the connection between our good friend Mr. Burton Gilliam, who plays Lyle, Madeline Kahn, and Jonathan Hillerman. Yeah, all three of them met on the set of Paper Moon.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? I mean, what an odd connection.
Looking through his IMDb, it's like he hit every show. He's like that one guy who's like Mark Shepard, who's famous for being in all the nerd stuff. This guy was in every TV show I ever watched.
Yeah, no kidding. He had that run from about 1973, from 1974, where he was in everything. I mean, Kojak, Hawaii Five-0, and then, of course, he was in History of the World Part 1, and then his run with Magnum P.I., and then there are a bunch of other shows and all that.
Prairie, Love Boat.
Love Boat, yeah. Yep, which is crazy, but he was on like 4 or 5 episodes of The Love Boat.
Yeah.
So
Murder, She Wrote.
But without looking, do you know what his last credit was?
I have no idea.
As a cheater, I'm sitting here looking at it as we talk. So
yeah, so it was 1996, A Very Brady Special. So he was on one of the Brady Bunch iterations.
You can't go past without saying what his character's name was, though.
Oh yeah. Tell us that.
Dr. Whitehead.
Yes.
Which seems like it should be in a Mel Brooks movie.
And what an auspicious way to go out, you know?
Play Dr. Whitehead. Pop me, please.
Wow.
But not too many times. They'll be infected.
Squeeze here.
Well, I wonder if when he was on his deathbed, if he was like, just film me in anything else, any other role, but don't let me go out on that.
Please, don't let this be my last credit. I don't want to play a Zit.
Yeah, Dr. Zit Popper. All right, and then the last one in this minute is Van Johnson. And he is played by George Firth. And George Firth had 96 credits. He was born in Chicago in 1932, died in Santa Monica in 2008. Long life, long career. His first credit, he played a guy named Lester on a TV show called Going My Way. He, of course, was, like everybody else, on Batman. For an episode, he played a character named Gallus. He was on I Dream of Jeannie. He was in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and played a guy named Woodcock.
Sorry.
Grow up, Alan.
14-year-old brain popping up.
I started it with the Whitehead thing. Sorry, my bad.
He said Woodcock.
Yeah. Well, you've listened to our show enough to know that this is part of the course. He was on Adam 12. He was on Bonanza. Okay, so
how many of these actors were on either Bonanza, Rawhide, or some other Western television show in the 60s? It seems like everyone.
Every one of them so far. I think every one of them. There may be one or two exceptions, but every one of them so far was in some kind of Western before they were in this. So here's another one. I remember seeing this in the theater. My parents took us to see some crazy stuff. Airport 77. And, you know, those airport movies were all about, like, planes running into jumbo jets and them having to, you know, and both pilots getting killed, or
which one was that?
Sinking to the sea. I want to say that's the one where the plane sunk to the bottom of the ocean.
Okay.
That's what it looks like from the screenshot.
Is that what it was? The one that was underwater?
Yep.
Okay. It wasn't the Concorde
that's the
one.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
Flight 23 has crashed into the Bermuda Triangle. Passengers still alive, trapped underwater.
I remember seeing that movie. I think I've watched all the airport movies, but I think it was all on television, so I've never seen them theatrically. So I have no idea what was cut out or added or taken and massaged, or, you know, what lines may have been overdubbed. But I remember as a kid seeing every one of the airport movies, and then when I finally saw Airplane, I realized, oh, we're making fun of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You know, what's funny about these movies, though, is they had, it was a huge cast, and you'd have people like in this one, Jack Lemmon, Olivia de Havilland, Christopher Lee, Robert Foxworth. I mean, you go through this list, and there are tons of actors and actresses. Gil Gerard was in this, and so we know a lot of these people who end up in these kind of crazy disaster movies from the 70s.
There's going to be a day where I'm going to need to go back and like watch all of those, the big quote blockbuster action adventure movies of the 70s, because I remember them as a kid, but I never went back and rewatched them as an adult.
There's never enough time, man. There's so many movies I see like that. I'm
like Towering Inferno. I know I've seen that a couple of times as a kid. The original, what's the liner that gets turned over? Oh my God, the boat that's on New Year's Eve.
Oh, the Poseidon Adventure.
Poseidon, yeah. I've the original one with Gene Hackman. I've only seen that twice. Earthquake, I've only seen once. I've ridden the ride at frickin' Universal Studios, but I hardly remember all these star-studded 17 Hollywood A-list actors all vying to be in this big budget action picture. And of course, it's totally different today. Our new action pictures are all the MCU movies or the DC movies, but back then I remember them as a kid. I just never went back and watched them now as an adult. Well,
a lot of them are actually better than I remember them being, and they hold up. And then some of them are just terrible. So, but I haven't watched the airport movies in a while, so I probably do need to go back and take a look at that. So,
here, does his main photo on IMDb, doesn't he look like the older version of Tom Hanks' character in Green Mile?
Oh my gosh, yeah, he does.
I was scrolling through, is that him or not?
That is funny.
Wow,
he does look like that.
Now I have to find out who that is.
All right, Walt, anything else?
Well, yeah, he was also in Cannonball Run. He played A.F. Foyt, which of course is a takeoff of A.J. Foyt, the famous driver,
Formula One racer.
Yes, and then his last credit is in 1998. He was in a movie called You Wish, where he played the minister. So he had quite a career as well, and it's funny going through these lists of, number one, how many people were in, how many of the actors and actresses we're looking at were in a lot of those same shows and movies. But then the number of credits that these folks have is really astounding.
I guess it's the time they all grew up as just those working actors. They never really were the lead, but they always had work.
Makes you think of English actors now, how everybody says there's 7 English actors and they're all in everything. And that's kind of how it was when Hollywood was starting out, or back in the early 60s and 70s.
Right.
Yeah, and I think particularly when TV came along, and it's kind of like now, you have a big boom where you need more actors than you've had. And there are just more jobs out there. And now with Netflix doing original content, all these other streaming services doing content like that, there are just a lot more opportunities. And I think that's kind of what happened when TV came along. And a lot of people who were not working as much, they'd work in a movie or two a year, all of a sudden had 4 or 5 credits a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, jumping from show to show. Well, especially the Western. I almost wonder if Mel Brooks grew up watching things like the Bonanzas and the Rawhides and saw those individuals and said, you know what, let's just pull them and yanked them all from his memory as a kid and put them here in this movie.
I'd say that definitely happened. He just had this image of, this is an old town person in this era, and I need that face and that voice kind of in my movie.
Excellent. Well done on the actor background. Anything else you have in your notes?
No, I think that's it for this minute.
Thomas, anything else you have for this minute?
I do not have anything except for the odd shape to the Reverend's head. I don't know if it's the widow's peak that he has or the shadowing, but it looks like there's a divot in the middle of his head.
Is there a second you're looking at particularly?
Let's see. Sure, anywhere in between like 37 and 40, when he's like really like leaning into the light makes it look like there's really this big divot right in the center of his head.
Oh yeah, he's got a real shiny hot spot.
It's like somebody pounded him with a
I see what you're
hammer
looking
right
at.
there.
Yep, I see.
It's like almost like a spotlight on top of his head.
Yep. Somebody just put a hammer right in his head.
All right. Well, before we set the table for what's coming up tomorrow, because we obviously have not finished this scene, we're still in the church and the congregation seems to have come to some kind of a conclusion. Before we go, Thomas, why don't you let everybody know where they can learn a little bit more about you and the podcast you are not only have been on, but are working on?
Oh, sure. Like I said, Never Ending Minute was a great journey through the Never Ending Story with Tierney Steele, and we had a fun time. But if you want to listen to stuff that I'm doing now, I've just started releasing episodes of a show called Crit Storm Cast, where we play Dungeons and Dragons with about 4 of my friends, and it's an actual play podcast. We're playing with D&D 5th edition rules, and we're having a really good time. It's a dark setting, but we're all pretty funny people, so we try to keep it light in that way, and check it out.
So is it sort of like eavesdropping in on you guys playing?
Pretty much, yeah. We basically have our dungeon master telling us what's going on, what we're seeing in a scene, and then we're playing through with dice rolls and everything, and people can follow along and listen to the humor as we say stupid stuff and act like little kids again. It's great.
Awesome. Used to play D&D an awful lot when I was a kid, and it turned me into a WoW junkie for about 9 years of my life.
I was there myself, my friend. I was there myself. I started on EverQuest, and it evolved into WoW, and yep.
Walt, if somebody wants to learn a little bit more about the Wilder Ride, where would you tell them to go?
I would tell them to go to Facebook and go to facebook.com/The Wilder Ride. Hit the button to join our listeners group, and that is where you can find out all kinds of stuff about us. And it gives you the opportunity to get involved in some of the conversations we've got going on there.
Excellent. Everyone, come back tomorrow because we want to finish up this scene and continue rolling along. Thomas is going to join us back again for minute number 19. That's going to start with the Reverend saying, "Let us now rise." And we're going to end with a brand new character saying, "They love toys. May I try one?" And that is going to be inside the office of Governor Lepetamain. But you're going to have to come back tomorrow for this, the Wilder Ride. Whitehead.
I think this is a bad idea.
There's a church full of Johnsons. Can I get in trouble if my Johnson's lying in the pew? That before we started recording.
Now we're gonna
Son of a bitch! What am I doing? I'll shut up until we start.
Yeah, there you go. Stop talking. All right, Walt, you still there?
Yeah, I'm just looking something up real quick. I just found Robin Hilton's house.
Oh, good. You found her house.
These are the tangents we love.
You found her house?
Uh-huh.
Are you doing Google Map or Google Earth?
No.
Thomas, I don't know if you realize that Walt is a private investigator and he's got a whole suite of tools at his disposal that you and I don't normally get to play with.
Yeah.
Okay, I cannot say where she is because she's in the LA area.
Oh, she's in LA.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. She's back in the LA area.
Oh, well, let's reach out to her. She's still alive.
Yeah, I will.
The worst that she says is, "No."
Yeah.
Bill.
The worst that she says is, "How'd you find my information?" and calls the cops on me.
Right.
You just say, "People in Hollywood talk."
Yeah, I got your number from somebody.
I bought one of those maps. It led me to your place.
Yeah. Man, she's got a big house.
That's not the only thing.
Yeah, she's got a lot of big
Is
stuff.
it true what they say about people of your...
Yeah.